Hello, I'm Brooke Fremouw, certified trauma support specialist that works specifically with adoptive families and proud mother to 11 adopted kiddos. Today, we're going to talk about the new Wonka movie. That's right. If you follow me on Facebook, you already know that there is so much chatter about the new heavy orphan themed Wonka movie that's currently in theaters, certainly will be released outside of theaters very, very soon. Is it okay for your adoptive family to go see the new Wonka movie? Well, I'm going to answer that question. And not only am I going to answer that question, I'm going to provide you a little bit of insight as to why I'm answering it the way that I am. And if you choose to see the movie with your family, questions that you should be asking your adopted children as you are processing the movie that you just watched. So, spoiler alert, there are going to be some things that give away the plot line, give away some of the ending. And so, if that is of concern for you, just be aware. We are going to talk about this movie start to finish. So, there's a few things that I find interesting. First of all, the children that I have left in my home, my youngest is 11, my oldest child is 29, and certainly not in the home at this point. The youngest kids that I have at home do not see themselves as orphans. They've been with me since birth. They were placed very, very early on, and they've never come from an orphanage environment. And so, if we were to watch something like Annie, they don't resonate personally with Annie. Annie's an orphan. They are not. They've had a family. And so, typically, when there's heavy orphan themed movies, we're okay to go and see them. My children don't draw the parallels between their life and those life. Now, that is not the case for some of my older kids. I have older children that were raised primarily in an orphanage, came to us as late teens, actually. And then I have some kids that are from foster care with really, really hard backgrounds and a lot of trauma exposure, a lot of uncertainty, and a lot of fantasizing about, sorry about that, fantasizing about their parent riding in on a white horse, the knight in shining armor, rescuing them from all of their disappointments, fears, and hurts in life. So I do have experience with kids in all realms of interpretation and history. I also have tons of clients that I work with all sorts of histories and backgrounds. So we've got to consider that as we are walking through, taking a closer look at this, right? So, what is the movie? It's very interesting because in the very start of the movie, one of the things that's gotten a lot of attention is the fact that Noodles, a key player in the movie, this little girl who was taken in, who has no parents, we'll talk about that in a second. She is called Orphan Trash, and that happens pretty close to the start of the movie. You're not into it too long before that happens. Wonka comes in off the street. He's illiterate, we come to find out. And somebody offers him housing, but it's a scam to trap him into slave labor. This little girl is also trapped into slave labor. And what's interesting is that Noodles, the orphan, is actually not an orphan by the end of the movie. She literally is lied to and kept away from her mom from the time that she's a baby and fantasizes about a mom that lives in a house made out of books, that one day she'll get to be with her mom, thinking that she doesn't actually have a mom. And that fantasy plays out to be true by the end of the movie. It's a library, not a house made out of books. But her fantasy of that knight in shining armor rescuing her is a reality. So keep that in mind, right? That very rarely plays out that way for our kids that do have that fantasy because of the trauma of their past. Secondly, Wonka is not portrayed as an orphan, and yet Wonka is a double orphan. Isn't that interesting? So the girl that is portrayed as an orphan is not, and Wonka, who is this young adult who makes magic chocolate, he is. His dad is dead, his mom is dead, and what he has is a candy bar. And this is the last candy bar that his mom scraped together cocoa beans. She'd get paid in cocoa beans. And she made this magic, phenomenal, it wasn't magic per se, but tasted like it, chocolate bar for him on his birthday, and then she passed away. And so she had said there's magic ingredients, and wherever your chocolate is, I'm there too. And he took that literally. And so his life passion has been in making truly magical with all sorts of magic ingredients that make people float and all the things of Willy Wonka. But he wants to open a chocolate factory. And his belief is that in opening the chocolate factory, his mom will show up physically, that she will be there, because those were words that he interpreted in that way. He actually specifically says, I just want to feel like I felt back when I was in her arms. Do you think that your children can relate to that? Wanting to feel how it felt when they were held by their biological mom? So again, there's a lot of touch points here that make this a sensitive movie. As the movie unfolds, there's a third factor that I think is interesting, and that is the fact that chocolate in this movie is directly linked to hardcore drugs. Isn't that weird? Now, most kids aren't going to pick up on that because they don't understand hardcore drugs. Then again, right? Then again, but there's the chocolate cartel is referenced. The police are being paid off in the movie, and drugs are literally, this is my street corner, right? That's the way that it is. So another interesting side note that makes you kind of go, as you're watching the movie. All of that being said, the movie is entertaining. It is definitely entertaining. It is fantasy. It is not intended to be taken seriously. However, as you can see, there are certainly some things we need to consider as adoptive families when we look at, is this movie going to be appropriate for my children? If your children have great communication skills, they're able to have a feeling, talk through and set that down and process that orally with you, then you're probably going to do okay. Because the reality is it's okay to miss your birth mom. It's okay to have identity questions. What's not okay is to act out in those things and then not be able to resolve them and process them and be able to accept your truth, your reality. So if your kids don't have the skill sets or aren't truly rooted in where they are right now, it would probably be a no as far as my recommendation for the movie. However, if you have kids, especially if they're a little bit on the older side, and your children can communicate through, I miss my mom, there are things that I valued about her. I can relate to what Noodles has gone through. There's something called orphan syndrome that they designate in this movie, and it means that this naughty girl has orphan syndrome because she doesn't behave these oppressive, horribly abusive people that have taken her in and demand slave labor from her. And so that's another component is, are your children going to align with, hey, I'm just a bad person because I have orphan syndrome? There's a lot of things that our kids are going to internalize. And do they have the ability to understand what they're feeling and thinking and communicate those things, process through them in healthy means? If you take your child to this movie, here's a few things that I would ask. These are discussion points that I would give to your children. I would say, hey, who's an orphan in this movie? And see if your children can identify the fact that, guess what? Noodles isn't an orphan and Wonka is an orphan. Ask them, what is an orphan? What is an orphan, right? In that conversation, then I would say, was Noodles like everybody else or different than everybody else her age? Was she a normal kid or not a normal kid? And why? What made her not the typical child? I don't like the word normal, so forgive me for using that, but the typical child, right? Why was she not typical? In that conversation, I would then move forward and say, do you feel like you're a typical kid? Do you feel like you're the same or different than other kids your age, and why? How did Noodles feel about that? How do you feel about that? What was Noodles' fantasy? What did she dream of when she was little? The answer there is to be with her mom who lived in a house of books. How did Noodles get to the point where that could happen? Was it right or wrong that she was kept from her biological family? Is it ever okay for a child to be kept from their biological mom? And if so, why? Why would that be okay? Right? So we can talk about the fact that, guess what? Noodles had a fantasy, and Noodles was wronged right from the very beginning. And the mother didn't do anything wrong. Noodles didn't do anything wrong. They were both healthy, and therefore they could be together in the end. But if mom is not healthy, then it's not okay for Noodles to be with her mom, but she doesn't belong as slave labor either, right? Another point of concern is superficial attachment. Noodles has escapism, and so does Wonka. They both have a hard time living with their truth and their reality, and there's a superficial attachment that exists and is in that realm of fantasy. Our adopted children, they can also struggle with superficial attachment, right? Where it's really hard for them to accept their truth of their biological family and their adoption trauma and their history, and therefore all of the expectations and the weight of attachment in an adoptive family causes them to want to superficially attach to teachers, mentors, right? Relatives that are not direct relatives. And in this movie, you definitely see that as well. I'm really having dog issues today. I apologize. All right. So with that, I would also say, who is Wonka in this movie? Why did Wonka carry that chocolate bar around with him all of that time? And what was his hope, right? And was his mom going to come back? The obvious answer there is no. She actually passed away, right? She was no longer alive. She wasn't going to come back. And people ridiculed him for thinking that she would come back. It does resolve itself. It turns into the magic ingredient that makes mom's chocolate so amazing is the love and the relationship. And he breaks that chocolate bar and he shares it with the people he loves, which are the people that he was enslaved with. So it's Noodles and some other people that worked in the washroom that they were all kind of trapped in. And so that does come full circle, but I would also retouch on that and say, hey, listen, was Wonka able to move on even though his mom couldn't be there for him? How was he able to carry her in spirit? And how was he able to let go of that chocolate bar? Right? I know my mom has passed away. And so for me, it's really like, oh, I don't want to give away any of her things because there's no replacing her things. She's never going to give me something else, right? It's a limited quantity of things that were hers. And yet, as I heal, I'm able to then say, you know what, child, grandchild, this was your Lolo's. This was your grandma's. And I want you to hold on to that because I know that Lolo had a special place in her heart for you too, and that you deserve to carry her with you the same way that I do. So there's a lot of really, really good talking points that you can have if your child or children are stable enough to have those conversations and again, process through them in healthy ways. I hope that this has been helpful for you. I do support families that are struggling with their adopted children. And so please subscribe for more information as it relates to adoptive families. Also, hit me up on thetraumamama.com if you are an adoptive family looking to settle the hurts that are in your heart and home and exchange those for peace. And I'm always on Facebook as well. For a free strategy call, connecting with me directly by phone, there's also a link in the description. Take care, God bless, and I hope that if you choose to go to the movie, you feel more equipped for what it is that you're walking into. Bye-bye.